Okay, part two of traveling with a baby during a disaster. So just to recap, the scenario was we have a baby, we have a family. They live on the ground floor. They have a newborn baby, and they have a baby about to be two. So almost your worst case scenario, right? In a crap hitting the fan scenario. So they've made the decision. They're really worried about the ratting getting out of control and them setting the building on fire or something crazy like that. So you've done your threat assessment and you've assessed we got to get out of here. We got to leave. Whatever risk that we're going to take to leave is less of a risk than staying here. So that's what your threat assessment. You're only leaving if this is your threat assessment, that it's more dangerous to stay than it is to leave. Otherwise, you're staying put. All right. So you made the decision to leave. You've got your plan. You're following your plan. And just to reiterate, what I think is the most important thing in the first video on this topic is you have to have a plan, and your wife has to know it, and you have to be following that to help bring peace and comfort, because keeping your wife calm, or as calm as you can, in such a high stress situation is massively beneficial to your wife and your children and to you, because any stress that elevates in them is more than likely going to elevate stress in you. So this is your goal. So I'm going to talk about different things that you can use here, like breathing and different techniques, and talking about co-regulation and so on. So we're going to get into this stuff in the video. So one of the very first things that I wanted to kind of talk about is a baby carrier. So we talked about the skin-to-skin contact in the first video. So I recommend the baby carrier that is like kind of like the Native American style, where it's almost like a little hammock that you wear, the lady would wear across her front. You only want to carry the baby in the front, especially something like a newborn to maybe 6 months. You only want that baby to be carried in the front. And I would really recommend even older than that. So we use the carriers that you carry the baby in the front, but you actually put this thing on and there was a flap that fell down. So you put the baby in and then you pull the flap up. The problem was there was actually a piece of material between you and the baby. So I don't recommend one of those for young babies if you're using it as part of your go-to equipment, your emergency equipment if you have to move with the baby. You want the skin-on-skin contact. If anything, take the baby's clothes off. Just strip the baby down to its diaper so that as you're moving, that baby is making skin-to-skin contact. So the mom, you can wear that right next against your skin, put your clothes, your sweatshirt, whatever you want over that. But trying to have as much of that skin-to-skin contact with the baby is really, really important. So now I talked about why we want that skin-to-skin contact, because it actually will produce that happy hormone that we were talking about, oxytocin. Sorry, I was getting a brain thing there. So we're creating oxytocin, right? And that's the happy hormone, the thing that's going to help regulate your emotions. But here's something else that's really, really important to understand. There's this thing called co-regulation. And this is where your baby will literally regulate itself even to the rhythm of your heartbeat. So for all you moms out there, like, this is what's happening essentially when you're breastfeeding, is you and your baby, your physiological responses, your respiratory system, like everything is literally becoming harmonious. Now, the important thing here is the baby is harmonizing to you. The baby is regulating to you, why it's called co-regulation. So the baby is regulating to your physiology. So what do you think that's going to mean if you're stressed out to your eyeballs? 100%, your baby is now going to start stressing out. So the baby's going to start crying, and we're actually designed to have a response to the cries that will heighten our physiological response, because we're supposed to respond to that. That's how babies talk at that age when they want something, when they're saying, hey, I'm hungry, I need my diaper changed, I don't feel good, hey, or I just want to hang out with you. It's all the same language at that point, it's just crying. Okay, the nervous system in a baby is just developing. It doesn't know even at young ages how to even make different sounds. The only thing it can do to cry, so all of its communication is through crying. And we're designed to respond to that. If we don't respond to that and the crying continues, it causes a stress release in us. So now we're back to the adrenaline cortisol dump, right? So you're getting all that stress, anxiety, and frustration building up. So when you're already in a high stress situation, you don't need to add to it, right? So you want to try to regulate your emotions as much as you possibly can. So skin to skin contact. And for the mom, got to try to stay as calm as you possibly can. So you're following your plan. So for all you ladies out there, and for all you dads, that's what you're doing. You're focused on your plan. So almost like drowned everything else out. I mean, you have to be observant. You have to be vigilant, okay? Because you're going to have to reassess your situation like consistently. Like literally in periods of seconds, you're reassessing your situation. You're constantly doing threat assessments with like every turn you take, every road you think about going down. If you're on foot, with every word that you go, you're constantly assessing, is this a safe route? Do we need to stop for a minute? Do we need to let these people go by? Do we need to hide? Are we going to run? Are we going to call for help? Do we see a group of people that we think, hey, we could walk with these people? You're just constantly reassessing, and that's what's going to really help you get through this. So you need to be clear-minded to be able to do that threat assessment and situational awareness. Okay, so situational awareness is absolutely key in these situations, and you need to function well to be able to perform it effectively. So keeping the baby calm. So co-regulation. Baby is literally regulating to you, mom. And here's the thing: if you allow that adrenaline and cortisol dump to keep taking place, some of that cortisol can literally get into your milk. So now your baby is literally drinking your stress and having that effect in its body. It hears everything, even your breathing. The baby regulates to your breathing, your heartbeat, your breathing, your respiratory. Like it's regulating to you, where it's almost like the two of you become one, like it was back in the womb again, which is why they talk about swaddling, how swaddling makes the baby feel safe and comfortable. Now, I believe that if you're going to have the baby away from you, then absolutely you want to swaddle it and go through all those practices. But in this situation, I'm just going to keep recommending skin-to-skin contact. I believe from the research that I've done, and if there's, hey, anybody that's in the industry that has a different opinion, hey, absolutely, drop a comment and let people decide for themselves, but just they have the information to go with. But from the research that I've done, it seems like in a high stress situation, the skin-to-skin contact is going to be the best. Maybe the only reason why you would swaddle the baby and separate it from you is if you're just not handling the situation well. If you realize I'm freaking out, I am totally freaking out and I'm not handling the situation well, maybe then you want to consider swaddling the baby. You still want to keep the baby close to you. But babies have this super brain, right? They have this super brain. It's called hyperplastic. Okay? So they've got this hyperplastic brain that is literally able, I love that term because just the visualization is like this hyperplastic, like hyper moldable brain, but it's got this hyper ability to learn. It's reshaping and forming constantly. And it's a gross simplistic for neuroplasty, right? Neuroplasty is another term for it, or neuroplasticity. So it's another term for that, but I love that term because it helps you remember what's going on in the baby's brain. And I think from the research I've done, it's kind of like 0 through to 2.5, and then the brain starts to change and solidify a wee bit. But this baby has a super brain. It can detect even your eyes, even the ability for you to keep eye contact. It's detecting that. It's absolutely detecting noises, sounds, stress, your breathing. If you're starting to hyperventilate, everything. It detects all of that. It's just absolutely incredible what a baby is able to do and how it learns. So in these high stress situations, you have to do everything you can. One of the things you can do to help protect the baby is try to neutralize some of its senses. So one of the senses, because, especially if it's newborn, I just became a granddad and my granddaughter, couldn't really see very well for the first few weeks. and her wee eyes open and she's seeing more and more all the time, and now you can realize that she's taking it in and she's following you, and things are just blurry. So in the beginning, really the sense that's already dialed in really, really well is the hearing. The baby was listening to what was going on even in the womb. Even in the womb, the baby is affected by high stress situations, especially if they're happening to the mom directly or they're loud noises outside the womb. The baby can be affected by that. So I would recommend some kind of noise reducing earmuffs as part of your emergency kit. So you've got these noise reducing earmuffs as part of your emergency kit, and just put them on the baby, and then you just move in that situation. If you and your husband are prone to arguments, put that on the baby. Just don't leave your baby vulnerable to hearing all this stuff going on. The data that's starting to come out right now is even babies that are not getting, like, say, physically abused, but they're just hearing the parents argue all the time, is having a greater and stronger physiological response in them than we previously knew or understand. So some of that data is really starting to trickle out of understanding how much a baby can absorb and how it can tell when things are not good just by the tone of your voice. Just by the tone of your voice, it knows there's a problem. So you don't have to use some of these techniques for a disaster. These are some techniques that you can use right now because we're just normal, right? And especially after having a newborn baby, you're getting less sleep. There's just all kinds of stuff going on. Maybe the mom feels like she's not getting enough help. Maybe the dad's just wondering why is my wife depressed all of a sudden? There's just a lot going on. Your lives have just changed. So use some of these techniques to maybe try to help with the situation. Plus, putting noise reducing earphones on. Never put anything in the baby's ears. Never put anything in the baby's ears. The baby, even like your foam, those things can expand and literally affect the ear canal. Plus, they're not meant to go in little tiny ears. They're meant for adult ears, right? So that's why I believe the thing that goes over the ears on the side of the head are way, way more effective and just safer to have in a baby. But hey, you and your husband are going to get at it, or you're worked up at your husband and you're just waiting for him to go home, and you hear the car pull up or whatever the case is, or the key in the door. Hey, just put those over the baby's ears. Better still, don't. Just control yourself and say what you have to say in a calm way, knowing that your baby is really taking in everything that's going on around him or her. Okay? So what are some of the techniques that you can use to control that? Breathing is absolutely vital. Breathing is vital because it interdicts any of the sort of physiological responses, the fight, flight, freeze response. Okay? So it's interdicting that. It's stopping that physiological response in its literally in its tracks. So you're distracting your mind. If you're going to breathe, one of the things that you have to do is you have to think about it. So just that initial process of thinking about something else. And you'll hear people, counselors, psychiatrists, whatever else, or psychologists, talk about, count backwards or think about your happy place or whatever the case is. So that's great, and absolutely, people who are professionals in the industry, absolutely pay attention to them. So what I'm going to say is this is just my perception of something, right? So when you have a high stress situation, it can be very, very similar to getting like a bucket of freezing cold water thrown over you when you weren't suspecting it, or jumping into water that is way, way colder than you suspected. Your body has this tensing. So you tense up. It has this response where you tense up and you hold your breath, right? So you tense up and you hold your breath. So a lot of the people that teach these, breathing techniques, box breathing, somatic breathing, tactical breathing, the somatic breathing and tactical breathing are really the same thing. They're just, one is used in a military application and the other one is the civilian world. But if you use these techniques, what's really interesting is that they start off with taking in a deep breath, okay? So what I'm going to say is, from my perspective and what's worked for me, and you absolutely can follow whatever other people are suggesting, but what works for me is forcing the breath out first. Because if something shocks me and I'm in a high stress situation, it's supernatural for me to suck in. It scares me, it shocks me, and I hold the breath in. So the very first thing I can do before I breathe again, because I've already took a breath in and I'm holding it, it's really hard to take in another breath. And now you're at risk of hyperventilating, right? You're taking in too much air, which is also really dangerous. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to force the breath out in short, small intervals, almost like pursing your lips, right? Force the breath out. So what I have found for me, and I think it's the case for most people, especially when I teach my class, I get a lot of affirmation to this, is when you force breath out, your body will naturally bring it back in. Okay? So the issue is, if you take a breath in and you're holding it, what you actually need to do is push it back out. And I would recommend you do that under controlled little blasts. And then you're naturally breathing in as you do that. You're breathing out, you're breathing in, but you're doing it in controlled measures. And this is a really good way to actually prevent yourself from hyperventilating. If you find that you're still taking in too much breath, cover a nostril and close your mouth, right? You can try to do the pursed lips things, okay? But I find what works really, really well, as long as you don't have a nose injury or something going on with your nose, as long as, at least one of your nostrils works very well. Obviously, if one doesn't, that's the one you cover. But what you just do is simply cover a nostril. Okay, this regulates how much air, how much oxygen you can take in. So this will prevent the hyperventilation that happens to a lot of people in a high stress situation. Okay, so now you're getting it regulated, you're getting your breathing regulated a little bit. Now you can go into one of these breath techniques, right, where you're breathing in. So some people they put different numbers. So like the 3-5-7 or whatever, 3-5-4 or whatever number. I hear all these different numbers that people recommend out there for it. But essentially what you're doing is you're taking in a breath, maybe 1 or 2, 3 seconds. You hold it for 2, 3, 4 seconds, and then you exhale. Now for me, what I find works is, taking in the breath. I can take in a lot of air very quickly. Hold it, and then so the exhale is longer than the intake and the hold. For me, that's what works, is the exhale is longer, roughly at least twice as long. For me, it's probably actually 3 times. So I breathe out for roughly about 3 times longer than the inhale. So the holding is just something even I'm still playing with to get an exact understanding. And I practice it under high stress situations, and I'm just not really in a lot of high stress situations. I do try to try some physical exercise to create them, but I don't think it's exactly the same. So I'm still kind of practicing with it. But for right now, I really find that whatever technique I use, the long exhale really helps me a lot, and it brings my physiological response back down. Okay? My sympathetic nervous system begins to calm, and it really helps me a lot. So it will help you think. It will help you think. So when you're thinking, you now have situational awareness. Okay? And that's the key to what we're trying to create here, is situational awareness. So we've got the baby carrier, the skin to skin. Unless you're not controlling your physiological response very well, then I would go to swaddling. You still want to carry the baby in your front. You want to keep the baby as close to you as possible, and just keep nurturing the baby, rubbing on the baby, tapping the baby gently, and just keep going. And you have a much better chance of keeping the baby controlled. Now, let's talk about a few things that, when you're moving, some things you should do or take with you. Going to throw in another wee story here from Ukraine. I hope they're good. So I'm in Surat in the Romanian border, and we were going across into Chernovitsi in Ukraine, and we were bringing supplies back and forth. So I'm back in Romania, resupplying, and we're at Surat, and we're waiting to cross over again, and there was all this commotion, and we had kind of become friends with the firefighters. And so I asked one of the firefighters, hey, what's going on? So they were stationed at the border, and they were really doing an awesome job, at really helping people that are come across the border. So I'm talking to these guys. So I seen one of the guys that I knew, and I said, hey, what's going on? and he said they just stopped a van on the Ukrainian side that was trying to leave Ukraine with a bunch of abducted children. So 2 men were stopped at the border with a box van. And at this time, there's so many vans like that just going back and forth, just bringing supplies back and forth. So these things weren't unusual at all, but the Ukrainians were doing an awesome job of inspecting, especially with the stuff going out of the country. They did an awesome job, and they found these 2 men were trying to take these abducted children out. Now here's what's crazy is I was there, and this firefighter told me that that's what was going on. I have no reason to believe that or doubt this man in any way, shape, or form, that what he was saying was not accurate. So when I tried to do research on it and tried to find some report of the event, I couldn't find anything. So current international sort of reports are indicating that 35,000 children have been abducted in Ukraine. I'm going to tell you, I believe that that's not an accurate number, that I think it's much higher than that. I believe it's much higher than 35,000. So if you're moving, even within this country, at some point, God willing, and hopefully we're praying for this, things start coming back to normality, right? But even if you're moving and there's checkpoints set up, don't be offended if people want to know if these are your children. Don't get yourself all worked up about that. Make it very, very simple, and assume that you're going to have to prove at some point these are your kids. Now, what's really cool is if you still have your phone, you can show a lot of these pictures. So that was vital. You know, I found in Ukraine, that's a lot of people. Some people were just like moving. They didn't have their passport. They didn't have your documentations, but what they did take was their phone, and they were able to scroll through their phone and show, you know, there was mainly soldiers at the checkpoints, you know, pictures of, you know, this is my child all the way up to this age, and people could see, okay, this is clearly their kid. So, but what's better than just your phone is birth certificates, documentation, you know, whatever documentation that you have of that child, just put a wee packet together so that if anything was to happen, that you're able to prove, hey, these are our kids. And don't be offended by that. In fact, you should be, as you're traveling, making sure that the people, if there is any checkpoints, know to check. Because I guarantee you, whatever checkpoints there is, people are going to try to smuggle children through those checkpoints that they have abducted. So not being offended and then actually encouraging people to check that there is documentation. So I was transporting people out of Lysychansk and to actually Kherson, Kramatorsk. I'm sorry, I get all my cities mixed up over there. So Kramatorsk, I was picking people up in Kramatorsk, and we were driving them to Dnipro. So I get into Kramatorsk, and this is kind of part of our normal routine at one point, right? Because we were evacuating them from Lysychansk, and from the front, we were getting them to Kramatorsk. They were staying there for a night or two, and then we were driving them in with other local people from that area that wanted to get into Dnipro. So we picked them up, and we were driving in, and at the front seat, you know, to the right of where I was driving was this young girl, you know, as it turns out she was 15 years old. So she showed us video of her being rescued from Severodonetsk. So her parents got trapped, and her parents couldn't get out, but the Ukrainian soldiers rescued her. So they got her out, and she was on this bus, and she was traveling with a guy who, at the time, I assumed was her dad. I didn't know who this guy was. But what we came to find out when we get there, and just through just some casual conversation, just asking the questions, and you could see that the guy was getting really uncomfortable. And so that really caused me to probe more. So I get the translator over, and he's asking questions. So I'm asking, like, where are you going? Like, is this your dad? Who is this guy? And she's like saying, no, I just met him at the bus stop. But he said that he had a safe place that he could take me. So when we got there, the guys had identified that there was known members of, I don't know what you call them, a mafia gang, whatever else, there. And they appeared to be waiting on this girl, and then they were talking to this guy. So we, through that conversation, was able to separate this girl, this 15-year-old girl. I have pictures and video with her, and we then got her to a church. Because you know what? There's nobody in this world like Christians. Not when it comes to helping and blessing people. Nobody. So we got her to a church, and they literally put her up in her own wee apartment, and they then were following up with her to get her to family members and take care of her, and trying to find out. When I left, I still hadn't found out if she had been reunited with her parents or not. I was never sure if her parents got out of severe Donetsk or not. So this is real things that happen, that there's predators out there. So absolutely, not only do not be offended, but really, really encourage people that if you're going through checkpoints, please make sure you check that these children that are being transported by family members, by people that they know. And if you ever end up, if for some reason you guys ever end up in a situation where you're part of that checkpoint, make sure that you're checking for that you hold them until you get verification. Don't just give up and get frustrated and just let them go without being really like 99% confident that these people are who they say they are. There's always going to be, I believe, a wee bit of doubt, but you know, some of that might just be paranoia. So you've got to do the best job you can at making sure, to the best degree you can, that the people that are transporting these kids are who they say they are. So I think I've covered everything. You know, I kind of pull this stuff out of my head, so there might be bits and pieces that I've missed. If there is, I'll just make a third video. But you know, the last part is the documentation. Just making sure that you've got the documentation and you're traveling, you know where you're going, you've got a good plan, you're monitoring what you do. And you know, singing, that's absolutely important. Get your child regulated. The studies that come out on babies listening to classical music, not only for calming them, but also helping their brains develop in a great way, increased IQ and all kinds of things that are coming out of these studies. Maybe get your child regulated. So those earphones, those noise reduction earphones that you put on your child, maybe you could be playing literally some gentle classical music. So not only is the outside world being hidden from the baby, but the baby gets to listen to this quiet, relaxing music that you've weaned the child onto. Because what you want is, you want as much of that regular routine. You want as much of what you do normally. Even though you're traveling, you're moving, and it's different. If you feed the baby at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, just pull over and feed the baby at 2 o'clock. You know, you feed the baby at 7 or 8 o'clock and try to put the baby down to sleep. Do everything you can to maintain as much of that routine as you possibly can. That baby's nervous system is literally developing based upon that routine, and that routine is giving that baby comfort. When you start getting the baby out of that routine, now you're going to have problems. And you've got a cranky baby, just like you would have in normal situations, right? So trying to keep that baby in as much routine as you possibly can is huge. Please remember this. A little human being, your wee baby, its nervous system is not developed. If it's crying and it stresses you out, please just remember that. The baby literally cannot help itself, and this is the only language it has. Okay? It's not acting out. It's not being a bad baby. It's not any of those things. It's just this innocent, beautiful wee human being, and this is the only way it can communicate. And if it's sensing everything else that's going on, it's trying to communicate to you, it's freaking out. Okay? If it was your little 2-year-old and it was saying, "Mommy, I'm really scared," you would hug it and hold it. That's what your baby is doing. So just keep your emotions under control when you're around that. Try the breathing, try the counting back, try anything you want. Try reciting a prayer. I love praying and asking God, give me peace. Give me peace, give me wisdom, give me direction, give me focus. Whatever it is that you're lacking, pray for it. The fact that you're just saying it means that you're becoming aware of it. So pray for it. Ask God for his guidance. He loves you, and I believe he 100% wants to help you. So give it to him. Again, let me know what you think in these comments. We're starting to get into stuff that, in my opinion, is like super important that we can use now. Like if you even just see people that are experiencing these things now, it doesn't have to be a disaster. Like, help people understand what's going on with their baby, what's going on with them, you know, and try to speak into their lives and help and bless them. Thanks again for watching.